Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this particular video, I'm going to discuss data governance and why it is critical to your next data-related project. Let's start with defining what data governance is. Data governance means setting internal standards and data policies that apply to how data is gathered, how data is stored, and how it is processed and disposed of. It governs who can access what kinds of data and what kinds of data are being governed. So now that we've talked about what data governance is, I want to share with you a little bit from experience about how this impacts a project, what things to consider when managing a project that's data related. And so when we think about this definition of data governance and internal standards and data policies, it is important to think about that because, as we know today, there is a vast amounts of data everywhere. And when you look at the healthcare space as an example, data is vast. So there's not only an exorbitant amount of data in its various forms, whether it's discrete data or big data, or it's housed in data warehouses through various health information exchanges and various health care medical records or clinical health records. Think about the vast amounts of data, how important it is. And not only how it's important, but is the data accurate? Is the data being shown at the right time and at the right place for the right individual that's going to allow them to make the right decisions? And so when you think about managing a project that's related to data, it is infinitely critical and it needs to be very well thought out with the right people in the organization to look at the data. When thinking about data governance, one of the things I found is ensuring that you understand who owns the data. What is the organization, the department, or the individual that's solely responsible for how a particular data set is being captured, how it's being stored, and what it means within the scope of the data and all things in context to that particular data set. And the reason why we say that is because there's this term that we hear many times about bad data in equals bad data out. This is true, but it goes well beyond that when we're thinking about data governance. There's nothing worse than bad data in and bad data out than having some data that is misrepresented or being used in a way that is not showing the information in its proper context, which actually will skew information that's being presented to others that have access to this displayed content. And so I know there's a lot of terms here that I am sharing with you on today, but what I'm looking to do here is to try to give you a broad sense of how important data governance is, what it means when working through data-related projects. And in this case, we're talking about projects within the healthcare space. As an example, and I won't be able to get to cover to all the various aspects of data governance, but here will be just a few tips and some things to consider when dealing with data on your next project. As a project manager, you may not be responsible for actually owning the data and governing it, but it will behoove you to have a good, broad understanding of the implications related to data. And so one of the things that we think about in the use of data, and I shared a moment ago about how we can display it, whether it's through an EMR system, delivering healthcare information about a particular patient or a business owner or a medical profession. So let's talk about it in terms of as a project manager. When working through projects that might be tied to data, if we're thinking about clinical and or business analytics, data is very important. And you might find yourself on a project where you're working with data architects. You might be working with business owners or department owners that are tied to specific pieces of data, whether it's operational type data, or it might be clinically based type data, patient care data. But the importance here is understanding who owns it. This is a part of data governance. The person that owns it needs to be a part of the project. This is super important to do this. When you have the owner of the data involved on your project, they are able to provide you with the limitations associated with the data, the benefit of the data, the level of accuracy that's related to this particular data, and are there any erroneous aspects of the data to be considered? Are there any outliers related to this data? And the list just goes on. So it's important to have an understanding and a good relationship with the data owner. And now when doing that, say, for example, that the operations department owner of data is looking to provide a dashboard to their organization that displays from an executive standpoint about how things are going operationally, right? So there's a particular audience for the data to be presented to, and then there's the owner of the data. Now, in the middle of that, you have the project managers, you have the business analysts, you may have data architects that are required to go and gather the data as a data source and then be able to feed it into, maybe there's some BI or some UI interface that's being developed that's going to present this information to those executives. It's going to be very important that there's data stewardship that's happening, where someone is managing what pieces of the data that needs to be presented, and if it's being presented in its proper light. We don't want that operational information to be misleading to the executives that are receiving that information and making decisions and company-wide decisions that are based on this data display. And so all these things are tied to data governance. Something else to consider when you are a project manager and you're working with data. There's various different organizations that may be involved. In the healthcare space, there's this thing about interoperability, right? One hospital system may have one piece of information. There may be some a community health center that has another bit of information. There might be a health information exchange that has yet a third piece of information. There might be payers, which is yet another piece of information that is all coming in, and all these pieces need to be sorted out. Now, one thing to be clear when we're thinking about data governance is the source of truth. What is the source of truth on different pieces of data? For example, at a hospital, a patient may have gone to this hospital, they may have come through the ER, they might have established themselves and have a primary care physician at this hospital system. But now in the same community health center that is in close proximity to the hospital, this same patient has also going there and received services at the community health center. There's also maybe a health information exchange within the same state that is also gathering information. And so essentially there is three pieces of information, and some may be differing, but when you look at the demographics and you look at certain, whether it's a medical history or whether it's the demographics, just looking at, for example, addresses, contacts, and those things within a medical record or a continuity of care document, we have to consider, well, which is the record of truth? Is this address correct, or is there a new update? And which organization is going to be viewed as the source of truth when it comes to performing tasks related to the patient. And so there's a whole lot of work that's being done in the space of interoperability. And this is not a new term if you've been in the healthcare IT space for some time. This goes back many years, at least 10 years, when we think about interoperability and the various government-sponsored incentives, if you will, towards getting to better interoperability, better continuity of care, better care management systems, better outreach into the communities. And again, all these things are still within the wheelhouse and what, as project managers, need to consider with respect to data governance. Now, one of the areas that we did not talk about, or I did not talk about yet in this video with respect to data governance, is those data stores, those cloud-based data warehouses that are housing in themselves yet another piece of data. And with those warehouses that are storing data in the clouds, they have their own set of strict policies on how the data is being managed, various data cells and policies and procedures on different types of data that's being stored and how it is being shared and offered up and at what frequency that data is being updated. And so, again, we're still talking about data governance. Within the space of data governance, sometimes we hear topics around getting data in real time. Do we have real-time data? What is the frequency upon which data is being uploaded or stored or refreshed and made available? What was the last date and time that this information was being presented? And are there any triggers or flags through the data exchange that let us know when new information has been made available, whether, again, it's in the health information exchange or it's in the community health center health record, or is it in the hospital system? If they are all truly interoperability and need to connect, there must be some consideration again on data stewardship, data governance, who owns the data, and what is the record of truth, and how do we have visibility into the latest and greatest information. And so imagine this scenario. There's a community health system, there's that health information exchange, and there is an ER department. A patient comes into the ER on a Saturday, receives care, and is discharged. It will be very important that that information gets sent over to their related patients chart within the hospital setting, so that when the patient goes to their primary care physician, hopefully on that Monday for a follow-up care and follow-up visit with their primary care physician, that they have access to that same information from the ER visit. Now, what happens here is, what if a medication is now updated at the ER that is not yet in the hospital where the patient is now visiting? Yes, of course, when you're being checked in and going through the various procedures, you're being asked about your medications, any new meds to be added to your list. And so that is certainly a standard practice. But there's also times in some systems where the med list is being updated and the actual EMR displays a window that shows and says to the provider that, hey, there is a new medication to be considered to be added to the existing medical record. Do you want to add this medication? And so that is one of the more fluid ways of being able to see, receive, and or process that information. Some systems may not have that ability or feature or functionality within their EMR systems, but it is certainly available today. But again, what we're talking about here is data governance. And so when your next project, especially if it's in healthcare IT, think about what are the internal standards of data policies, what's already in place that apply to how data is being gathered, what standards and policies are in place for processing the data. And then at the end, what is the standards of even disposing of the said data? There are certainly dates that are tied to specific types of data that need to be dealt with. There may be a termination period. It might be 7 years that an organization or a particular type of data needs to be retained, and then it needs to be disposed of and documented accordingly to those standards. And so these are some things to keep in mind. So if you're new in the project management space and working in healthcare IT and on any projects that are related to data, please take some time to reach out to those business owners that are responsible for data governance within your organization, and make sure that you are building a relationship with them in order to better work through those projects. And so that concludes this particular video. I hope it's been helpful on the topic of data governance. And as always, be encouraged, be true to yourself, and be the best you to help others. Thank you.